It was my birthday, the day I had been looking forward to for months, the one day that was supposed to be all about me. The scent of freshly baked cake filled the air as my husband, James, and I sat at the dining table, surrounded by family. It was supposed to be a celebration. But instead, it turned into my worst nightmare. The smile I wore faltered as James leaned back in his chair, his face twisted with anger. "I've had enough," he suddenly growled, startling everyone around the table. His voice was low but venomous, cutting through the air like a knife. "I can't do this anymore. Get out of my house." My heart skipped a beat as I tried to process his words. Was this a joke? But his face told me everything. I was no longer welcome in the life I had tried to build with him. The cake in front of me became a blur, the laughter and chatter of our family fading into the background. I said, "Get out!" James shouted, slamming his fist onto the table. In that instant, my world shattered. This wasn't how I envisioned my birthday. This wasn't how I thought my marriage would end. As I stood there in shock, unsure of what to say, he picked up his wedding ring and threw it at me. It hit my chest with a soft thud and bounced to the floor. The cold metal on the floor mirrored the coldness I now felt inside. I was stunned. The room was silent. No one spoke, no one moved. It felt like time stood still. Everyone's eyes were wide, their mouths agape. But then, as if to break the suffocating silence, Grandpa, who had been sitting quietly at the end of the table, slowly stood up. The gray in his hair and the wrinkles on his face gave him an air of wisdom, but it was his sharp eyes that caught everyone's attention. With an air of authority that surprised everyone, Grandpa locked eyes with James, his voice steady but filled with undeniable power. "You shouldn't have done that," Grandpa said, his words carrying the weight of years of experience. "Because now you lose everything." My breath caught in my throat. I could see the look of disbelief in James' eyes. No one had ever spoken to him like that. Everyone in the room was waiting, frozen, unsure of what would happen next. I could feel the tears threatening to spill from my eyes, but I held them back. Grandpa's words rang in my ears, and for the first time that night, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe, just maybe, this was the turning point. Maybe, everything was about to change. The room was thick with tension. Everyone looked to Grandpa, waiting for him to say more. But instead, he stood silently, his eyes never leaving James. The silence was deafening, and it felt as though the world had narrowed down to just the two of them, my husband, the man who had betrayed me, and my grandfather, the man who had always protected me like a shield. James' eyes flickered with anger and disbelief. His face turned red as he clenched his fists at his sides. He wasn't used to being spoken to like this, especially not by an old man. He was used to being the one in control, the one who called the shots. But now, for the first time in our marriage, James wasn't in control. I could see the storm brewing in his eyes, the simmering rage that had been building for months. "You don't get to talk to me like that," James spat, his voice sharp and cold. I flinched at the venom in his tone, but Grandpa didn't back down. Instead, he took a step forward, his voice calm but firm. "You've made a mistake, James. You've crossed a line. And now, there's no going back." It was then that the full weight of his words hit me. This wasn't just a spat between husband and wife. This was bigger than that. The way Grandpa spoke, with such certainty, made it clear that James was going to lose far more than just my love. He was going to lose everything he had worked so hard to build, his reputation, his fortune, and even the respect he once commanded. I couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope inside me. The man I had married had been a controlling, arrogant, and selfish individual. He had manipulated me for years, making me believe I was the problem. But now, I was beginning to see that he was the one who had been wrong all along. James shifted his gaze to me, his eyes narrowing as if he were trying to figure out my next move. "You think you can turn everyone against me, don't you? You think your grandfather's words mean anything? Well, let me tell you something, you don't get to take everything from me. You don't get to ruin me." I felt a rush of emotions surge through me, anger, pain, and fear. But there was something else too, a sense of empowerment. For the first time in years, I wasn't scared of him. I wasn't cowering under his control. The shift in the atmosphere was palpable, and I knew that this moment would define everything. Grandpa's words still echoed in my mind, now you lose everything. But what did it mean? Was Grandpa going to expose something about James? Was he going to reveal secrets I didn't know about? My mind raced as I tried to process the situation. The tension in the room felt like it could snap at any moment. I knew things weren't going to be the same after this. James stood there, seething with anger, his hands shaking as he stared me down. I could see the fear creeping into his eyes now. For the first time, he wasn't the one who held the power. And that's when I realized this was my turning point. The moment where I would take control of my own life. As the tension in the room thickened, I felt the weight of the moment settle heavily on my chest. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the realization that I had spent years in a toxic relationship, allowing James to control my every move. Every decision I made had been scrutinized, every breath I took had been dictated by him. But now, as I stood there, silent, trembling, but stronger than I had ever been before, I understood something deep within me. I wasn't his pawn anymore. I couldn't help but think back to all the moments that led me here. How many times had I stayed silent, holding my tongue to avoid the outbursts, the passive-aggressive jabs, the subtle manipulations? How many nights had I cried myself to sleep, feeling utterly alone in the same bed I once thought would offer comfort? I had always made excuses for James, told myself he was under stress or that his harsh words didn't really mean anything. But now, standing here with the searing heat of the truth engulfing me, I saw things for what they truly were: lies, deceit, and an endless cycle of emotional abuse. James had played on my vulnerabilities for years, using my kindness and patience as weapons against me. I had been his captive, a willing participant in my own suffering, too afraid to break free. Grandpa's words rang in my ears again. Now, you lose everything. What did he mean? What did he know that I didn't? I couldn't even look at James without feeling disgusted. The man who had promised to love me, to cherish me, was the one who had ripped apart the fabric of my soul. I had given him everything, my love, my trust, my time, and he had thrown it all away. But now, for the first time, I understood the true cost of my silence. I had kept everything bottled up for too long, swallowed the hurt, the insults, and the betrayals, hoping things would get better. I had hoped that love would be enough to fix the cracks. But it wasn't. It never was. As Grandpa stood there, unwavering and unflinching, I couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for him. He was the embodiment of strength, the rock I had always turned to in times of need. And now, it was his words that held the key to my freedom. James tried again, his voice filled with venom. You think you can tear me down with your old man's threats? You think people will believe you? You're nothing without me, just a woman who's going to end up alone and forgotten. His words stung, but they didn't have the power they once did. In the past, I would have cowered under his insults, doubting myself, second-guessing my worth. But now, something had shifted. I wasn't going to be the victim anymore. I looked at Grandpa, and he gave me a subtle nod, his eyes filled with understanding. It was clear that he knew the truth. This wasn't just about me and James. This was about reclaiming my life, my voice, my future. I took a deep breath, steadied myself, and looked James straight in the eye. You're right about one thing. I am nothing without you. But you, I paused, making sure my words hit him like a thunderclap. You're nothing without me either. And that's something you'll soon regret. The room fell silent once more, the weight of my words hanging in the air like a thick fog. This was the beginning of my revenge. But it wasn't just about making James suffer, it was about reclaiming my life, my power, and my future. The air in the room was thick with unresolved tension. James stood there, his jaw clenched, eyes burning with contempt. But despite his anger, I could see the subtle shift in his demeanor. He was beginning to realize that this time, I wasn't backing down. For so long, I had been the one to take his insults, to suffer in silence, but now, for the first time, I was standing up to him with a quiet strength. I was no longer afraid of his wrath, I was ready to reclaim my life, and in doing so, I would make him pay. The moment that Grandpa had spoken those words, asterisk, you shouldn't have done that, because now you lose everything, asterisk, something inside me had shifted. It was as if the blinders had been taken off, and I saw everything clearly, all the ways James had manipulated me, controlled me, and crushed my spirit. But what Grandpa had said wasn't just a warning. It was a promise. He knew something I didn't, and it was that knowledge that set the wheels in motion for the plan that was about to unfold. I couldn't just leave, as much as I wanted to. I needed to make sure that James would never hurt me or anyone else again. He needed to understand the consequences of his actions, and I was going to be the one to show him. I wasn't just going to walk away and start over. This time, I was going to leave a mark. Do you really think you can hurt me with your words? James spat out, trying to regain his confidence. I'll make sure you regret this. But I wasn't intimidated. I had spent too many years catering to his ego, too many nights cleaning up his messes, and too many days pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. Now, it was my turn. And I wasn't going to do this the way he expected me to. I turned to Grandpa, whose steady gaze was fixed on me. His calm presence gave me a sense of reassurance, a reminder that I wasn't alone in this fight. I could feel the support radiating from him. It wasn't just the promise he had made, but the knowledge that Grandpa had seen battles before, battles in which the underdog prevailed. He was a man of strategy, and right now, I needed to think like him. I had spent the last few months keeping track of everything, documents, emails, phone records. I knew James had been hiding things from me. Financial accounts, side businesses, the way he had been secretly siphoning money from the joint account. Everything pointed to one thing: he had been using me as his cash cow. Now, I had the power to expose him, to take everything he had worked so hard to cover up, and turn it into his downfall. It wasn't just about getting back at him, it was about justice. About making sure that James would never have the chance to hurt anyone else the way he had hurt me. I made up my mind then, this would be no ordinary revenge. I would play the game the way he had taught me, using the tools he had given me against him. I would expose his secrets, not just to me, but to everyone. The people who once believed in his charm, the friends who supported him, the business partners who saw him as a respectable man, all of them would see the truth. But I wasn't going to do it alone. I had a team, people who cared for me, who wanted to see him pay. Grandpa had connections. I had legal expertise. And together, we would make sure James' life crumbled before him. The day had come. James thought he had won, he thought he could get away with everything, just like he always did. His arrogance had always been his downfall, but today, it was my turn to make him see just how much he had underestimated me. As I stood in the courtroom, watching James and his high-powered lawyer sit across from me, I couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction. This was it. This was the moment when everything would come crashing down for him. Every lie he had told, every betrayal he had committed, was about to be exposed. And I was going to be the one to make it happen. The lawyer tried to stand tall, but I could see the sweat gathering on his brow. The tension in the room was palpable. I knew what was coming, he did too. James, sitting next to him, looked smug, but there was a flicker of doubt in his eyes. He didn't know it yet, but the ground beneath him was slipping away, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. I had spent the last few weeks carefully planning every detail of this day. The documents, the evidence, the emails, everything was in place. I had gone to the authorities, I had contacted the people who had been burned by James, and I had gathered a group of witnesses who would testify to his deceit. I had worked with the best lawyer I could find, one who shared my desire for justice, and together, we had crafted a strategy that would leave James no place to hide. The moment the trial began, the pieces fell into place one by one. My lawyer started with the financial records that James thought were hidden so well, but that I had uncovered. With every piece of evidence, I could see his confidence slip. The once untouchable businessman, the man who had flaunted his wealth and power, was now visibly shaking. His lawyer tried to object, but the evidence was irrefutable. Then came the most satisfying part, the testimony of the people James had wronged. His former employees, the ones he had fired without cause, the business partners he had manipulated, the people who had trusted him, all of them stepped forward and exposed his lies. I watched as James' face turned pale, as the weight of his past actions crushed him. He tried to maintain his composure, but I saw it in his eyes, the panic, the realization that everything was falling apart. The smug look he had once worn was gone, replaced by desperation. He knew it was over. All the power he had held over me, all the control he had thought he still had, was slipping through his fingers. And then, the final blow came. My lawyer presented the last piece of evidence, an email chain that James thought had been deleted. It showed his plans to hide assets, to manipulate the system, to cheat me out of what was rightfully mine. The room went silent. The judge looked at James with disappointment in his eyes, and I saw the truth settle in. This man, this person who had tried to destroy me, was finally being held accountable for his actions. I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph as the judge declared the verdict. James was guilty. The room erupted in murmurs as the realization dawned on him. This was it. His empire was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As I walked out of the courtroom, I felt lighter than I had in years. I had done it. Not only had I exposed the truth, but I had also taken control of my life again. James had lost everything. His wealth, his power, his freedom, all of it was gone. And I had finally, truly, won. As the courtroom doors closed behind me, I took a deep breath, my heart finally slowing its furious beating. I had been waiting for this moment for years, and now that it had come, a sense of peace washed over me. The worst was over. James had lost everything, his business, his money, his pride, and now it was my time to finally move on. I stepped into the bright sunlight outside the courthouse, my lawyer by my side, and a small smile tugged at the corners of my lips. Everything had fallen into place perfectly. The weight that had burdened me for so long, the constant battle to survive, to hold it all together, had finally lifted. I had fought for justice, for the truth, and now, I could breathe again. As I walked through the parking lot toward my car, I felt the first stirrings of something new, hope. It had been so long since I had allowed myself to feel it, so long since I had imagined a life outside of James' shadow. But now, I could see the possibilities. The future was mine to shape. In the weeks that followed, my life transformed. With the court's ruling, I received my rightful share of the family estate, which had been hidden away by James for so long. I took the money, not for revenge, but for freedom. I invested it wisely, securing my future and ensuring that my children would never face the hardships I had endured. I started a new chapter, one where I could live without fear or regret. But there was more. I decided to take a trip, something I had always dreamed of. Alone. No obligations, no expectations, just me and the open road. I drove to the coast, to a small town where the ocean stretched endlessly before me. I walked along the beach, feeling the cool wind on my face, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. I thought about James, his arrogant, selfish attitude, and the pain he had caused me. I knew he was out there somewhere, probably scheming his next move, but it didn't matter anymore. I had done what I set out to do, I had taken back my life. And as I stood on that beach, watching the sunset, I realized that I was finally at peace. The next day, I got a call from my lawyer. James had been arrested for his financial crimes. His assets had been seized, his reputation destroyed. The downfall had been swift and unforgiving. It was almost poetic justice. He had tried to ruin me, but in the end, it was he who had been broken. I couldn't help but smile. It felt right, like the universe had finally set things right. My revenge wasn't about violence or anger, it was about restoring balance, about reclaiming what was mine. It had been a long journey, but it had been worth every step. Now, I was free. Free to build a life on my own terms. Free to live without fear of the past. And as I stood there, watching the waves crash against the shore, I knew one thing for sure, this was just the beginning. It had been weeks since the court ruling, and James had vanished from the public eye, his reputation in tatters. I had thought that would be the end of it, that I would never have to see him again, that the justice I sought had been delivered. But fate had one more twist in store for me. One rainy afternoon, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I hesitated for a moment before picking up. Hello? A familiar, cold voice responded. You think you've won, don't you? James. I felt a chill run down my spine. My hand trembled, but I steadied myself, gripping the phone tighter. What do you want? I want everything back, he said, his tone dripping with venom. You think you can just take it all from me and walk away? No one does that to me. I could feel his anger seeping through the line, but it didn't scare me anymore. I had already taken my power back. You had your chance, James. You lost. You're finished. There was a brief pause, and then he laughed, a low, menacing laugh. We'll see about that. You'll regret crossing me. I hung up, my heart pounding in my chest. But as the rain continued to pour outside, a strange sense of calm settled over me. James had threatened me before, but this time felt different. It wasn't just about him trying to regain control, it was about something much darker. He wasn't going to stop until he had destroyed me completely. The next day, I received an unexpected visitor. It was my lawyer, but he wasn't here for a routine update. He had urgent news. James had filed for an appeal, hoping to overturn the court's decision. He had also accused me of fraud, claiming that I had manipulated evidence to win the case. My stomach churned as I listened to the details, but my lawyer's expression remained firm. Don't worry, he assured me. We'll handle this. He can't win this time. But I knew that this wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It was personal. James was out for blood, and he wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. That night, I sat alone in my living room, reflecting on everything I had been through. The pain, the humiliation, the years I had spent trying to survive. But now, I had something I never had before, strength. I had fought back when I was knocked down, and now I was ready to finish this fight for good. I didn't just want to win, I wanted to destroy him, completely. This was my final act of revenge, and I wasn't going to let him get away with anything. The courtroom was silent. The air felt heavy, but the weight on my shoulders had lightened in ways I couldn't fully describe. I was finally free. The judge's gavel struck with finality, sealing the fate of James and our turbulent marriage. His desperate attempt to appeal had failed miserably. As I stood in front of the judge, listening to the final verdict, I felt the years of pain, betrayal, and anger slowly begin to melt away. The man who had once controlled my life, reduced me to nothing, had been outsmarted. The world he had built on lies and manipulation was crumbling around him, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. The weight of the victory sank in. But this wasn't just about the legal battle, it was about reclaiming my life, my dignity, and everything I had lost along the way. I had taken back my power, and now, I was free to rebuild from the ashes. I glanced at the courtroom door as it swung open. There, standing in the doorway, was my grandpa. His eyes met mine, and the pride I saw there filled me with a warmth that I hadn't felt in years. The same grandfather who had stood by me all those years ago when I was about to give up was there, once again, reminding me of the strength I had within. Grandpa, I whispered, and the tears I had held back for so long finally escaped. His presence was a constant reminder of why I had fought so hard. I could finally breathe again. I wasn't the same person I was when I entered this battle. The woman who had been cast aside, humiliated, and pushed to the edge was now someone who had found her voice, her strength, and her freedom. I could finally see the future ahead of me, a future that was mine to shape, without the weight of the past holding me back. That evening, I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, overlooking the city. The lights of the skyline glittered like stars, and I could feel the cool breeze against my face. I had done it. I had survived. And now, I was going to thrive. I thought of the journey it had taken to get here, the sleepless nights, the moments of doubt, the endless fights. But I had emerged victorious. Not only had I taken back what was rightfully mine, but I had also proven that no one could break me. I was stronger than I had ever been before. The phone buzzed in my pocket, and I pulled it out, seeing a message from my lawyer. It was official, James had lost everything. The assets, the house, and all the wealth he had accumulated at my expense were now gone. His empire had fallen. But as satisfying as it was to see him lose everything, what mattered most was that I had won my freedom. I had taken back my life. As the sun set on that chapter of my life, I smiled to myself, knowing that no one could ever take my power away from me again. And as I looked at the horizon, I whispered quietly, "This is just the beginning."